Hello and welcome to Unsourced Wall. My name is Elvis, and as always, I am your host. Alright, so this is going to be kind of a long one. We have a huge backlog of reviews to get through this week, including a full-length review of the new season of The End of the Fucking World, which just dropped this weekend, and I cannot wait to get into it, because the first season was one of my favorite seasons of a comic show of all time. Let's just drop right into it and hopefully get through this smoothly. First off, let's start with some movie news. It seems that Disney has submitted pretty much every named actor in Endgame up for Oscar contention, which is kind of ridiculous and slightly pathetic. Say what you will about Suicide Squad and how it won its Oscar, but the makeup and prosthesis on Killer Croc, which was fully practical, was Oscar-worthy work. This is just sad because they're putting in characters that had maybe one line of dialogue in the entire movie too. And I'm guessing their whole strategy is they can't reject every single actor, and hopefully they do, because nothing in that was worth like a Best Supporting Actor or a Best Actor Oscar. We're also getting rumors with regards to more casting from Matt Reeves' Batman, including Colin Farrell as the Penguin and Andy Serkis as Alfred. And well, best of luck to them if that's true, because it's going to be quite different if it is. And lastly, in actual comic news, most unfortunately, it seems that artist Goran Parlov suffered a stroke this week and is currently undergoing recovery. He has said that he is starting therapy soon to regain control over his left side, and may we all wish him and his family the best of luck and all of our good graces in this trying time, and I hope that he recovers soon. Anyway, let's move on to what I read this week. First off, we have The Dreaming number 15, and the series is still so far from its peak, but I will give it that this latest issue feels like it has the same temerity and tenacity of last month's. Solid structural core with a nicely spry and hardened edge to it, both ebbing and flowing to give the story a necessary unease and rhythm to its harsher, more jarring tones. It brushes against maybe going a bit too much overboard, especially in the middle where we have this huge montage of the characters and set pieces that we've seen so far in the middle of Matt the Raven's flight. But the denouement and lament of Abel that underscore and cap off the entire issue makes it work. It lands, it hits. It's darker, pervasive, and has enough dramatic stakes and weight to it to feel genuinely threatening and earned. Spurrier is leading soon enough, and I hope that he's been able to finally steer a course and give this run a direct and determined finale that it deserves. It's just a fun to read issue, glossy but also bold and immersive, and honestly it felt like just reading a great chapter in a saga, like you've been really building toward a more encompassing threat and danger, and it really does sell that, and I appreciate that it did. Overall, 2 thumbs up. Next up, we have Grendel, Devil's Odyssey number 2. I feel like this series is going to be a series of misadventures and errors, and I'm fine with that. Apparently, this is only going to be 8 issues, and so we're kind of a quarter of the way in already, but I still have hopes for this. This wasn't a bad issue, but it's pretty light and comedic. Like, if this is going to be an Odyssey, then I can see how the story might be littered with just small side adventures and pit stops like this. Just Grendel Prime and his floating robot head sidekick stopping to mess around with various planets and alien cultures. I also just hope that the series is able to get a real plot underway besides that. This issue was fine, and the strife and mischief that Prime ends up causing for the aliens from issue 1 is humorous and honestly pretty calamitous. Like, it really does feel like everything is just tumbling down, and it's like a disaster dominoes kind of effect. It's not something that overstays its welcome, and various set pieces in it are brought to life with vibrant action and art. It's just a little unmemorable by the end of it. Like, nothing in here is, vastly unique or honestly something that's going to stick with you. Hope it starts to take some root with the characters if the plot is going to remain in constant flux like this, because unless the characters start working here, I don't see this being as special as other minis and other chapters in the Grendel saga have been. So overall, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle. Next up, we have Inferior 5 number 3, and it finally happened, but another Giffen series has been cancelled. Pretty quietly too, but Inferior 5 has been cut from a 12-issue maxi series to a 6-issue mini, marking this issue as the halfway point of the story. And yeah, no, it doesn't feel like it at all. So you can tell that this wasn't in the cards, that they weren't planning for this or having any contingency for it. It's still running into the same problems as last month, where it feels like Giffen has no idea what to do and is just throwing ideas at the wall, but it's at least broken up with some better dynamics growing between the 5, and having him do a really wry and self-defacing recap of DC Comics lore and backstory. Giffen hallmarks which are done so damn well. But then you get some nonsense like a hero called the Tasmanian Devil fighting a Starro that lets live smaller Starros, and it's just messy and honestly uninteresting. And that's why it's a shame that the series is now going to be 6 issues, because now we have more than half of it being pretty uneven. instead of the possibility of it just being growing pains. It's not overburdened by being choppy and chaotic, and not in the good way. I really wish it hadn't turned out this way, but I'm not surprised. At the very least, the Peacemaker backup from Lemire has still such a great mood and verve to it, and I hope it lands on its feet, because the main story certainly won't. I don't think there's enough time to correct this ship, or to make sense of any of this. It took 2 years for this series to even come out, and I have a feeling that we're going to get another classic fuck you DC gifted ending, if Lemire can't stop that at least. I don't expect this to end satisfyingly at all, but I'm still going to be following this through to the end. Overall, 1 thumb middle, 1 thumb down. Moving ahead, we have the Immortal Hulk number 26. This was a great breather issue. Just something to cool down and take stock after the shattering events in the last 2 issues or so. And well, that's all it kind of really does. It's just there to realign things and to show the effect on both the Hulk and the cast of his comic, but also to catch up the rest of the Marvel Universe up with it. So it's pretty talky and very montage heavy. It's very expository, and it's just really about this is how this series is going to be now. This is how these characters are going to interact now. And it's still good. It's still got a bite to it that I love. The kind of bite that brings Bruce's self-destructive and blindly aggressive misanthropy to the forefront. It's just as good as seeing the Hulk be a giant bastard. But you need either or. And I love that Ewing can switch between those like that. And like I said for the previous issue, it really helps to emphasize exactly how and why Bruce / the Hulk and the one below all would be drawn to each other and how they would counterpoint each other. It's a pretty minuscule bottle issue, but it knows its place and it's taking its time in a way that really shows that it knows what a definite pacing it has to have to land moments, making even ludicrous stingers like this one has come out punching. I can't wait to see where the series goes next, because it's issues like this that display that the writer really knows exactly where he wants to go, because he's bringing in a lot of these different aspects and showing exactly what kind of consequences they might be playing with here, or they might have rebounding on themselves. So I appreciate that. I enjoyed the issue for what it is, and I can't wait for next month. So overall, 1 thumb up, 1 thumb middle. And finally, we have Legion of Superheroes number 1, Bendis' first issue, and I just had to do it just to see how it was. And unsurprisingly, it was dragging, slogging, and overstuffed with inane dialogue ticks and back and forths. It's already full of unoriginality and Justice League pacing and Justice League plotting and just it's classic Bendis laziness. I didn't expect much from this or anything at all, and I was still kind of disappointed. I'm unsurprised that Bendis is saying that he's going to be bringing in like a new Dr. Fate and a new Hawkman and a Planet Gotham that appears in this issue. They're going to join the Legion, because when he got Guardians of the Galaxy, his first move was to make them more like the Avengers, to the point where the first volume of his run is called Space Avengers. So this probably should be called Future Justice League. And we already had that. It was called Justice League 3000. And that was probably a lot better than this is going to be. So, oh well. Overall, 1 thumb middle, because it's just kind of harmless, and 1 thumb down because it is also pretty bad. And now we can move on to what I watched this week. I'm not going to be reviewing Titans this week because I'm dropping that for the rest of the season. It is just too boring, and I'm going to let the last 3 episodes just kind of stew and see if there's any point in doing a full season review when it's all over. Because as of now, I am just too tired of finding synonyms for boring, because that's all it is. It's been really, really fucking boring. So let's move on into Watchmen, episode 3. She was killed by space junk. I've been pretty blah on this series so far. The first 2 episodes had highlights but didn't really impress, and that's not really going to change. But the one thing that did get me through this news episode is just how much more personality and identity it had. Maybe it's that it's been told mainly through the POV of Laurie Blake, so there's that definite and solid tether to the comic that's been feeling more or less flimsy so far, or that we're getting a greater scope of the world with Dr. Manhattan phone booths, the escalation of vigilante legislation, and Ozymandias' captivity and insanity and his whole cabin fever in a castle situation. But it feels a lot more engaging and arresting than what's come before, because there is already this older, built-up connection to these characters, and now seeing them and how they develop just comes off a lot more interesting than having new characters going through the same sort of very set and worn out motions as any kind of generic drama. That's not to say that new characters like Looking Glass and Sister Night aren't entertaining. They can be, but neither is really breaking the mold or doing anything fresh. Dropping Laurie right into its plot, on the other hand, brings up brand new avenues to explore fresh new dynamics of her. It might sound a bit more eccentric, but it's really more along the lines that Lindelof and company aren't really inventing anything new here or doing anything, well, exciting. It's just kind of been a generic police drama with superhero masks thrown into it, and it's been pretty lacking and pretty limp and boring. So having a thread that is already founded and built helps a lot. It's just a welcome presence that grounds everything about this series, and I hope they used Laurie to the fullest potential here, because having her just have to meander around through this entirely new plot. It's a lot more interesting than what we've been seeing so far because we know this character and it's interesting to see how she's developed and how she's changed and all these contrasting elements that are bouncing off against her between this new show and what we already know. It's something. It's not a lot, but it's something. So a character-focused episode on her did wonders. I also just want to say that apparently there's been some uproar about the show having a Dr. Manhattan dildo, which I found funny for so many reasons, because in real life you can get a dildo for every fictional character possible. Like there was a Frankenstein dildo and a Freddy Krueger dildo, so it just makes sense that there would be a Dr. Manhattan dildo in the Watchmen universe. But there's also this ridiculous interview that Lindelof gave saying that Laurie wouldn't get over being with a god, which is just pure nonsense because that's not what her relationship was, and it's not even broaching why their relationship failed. But overall, I mean, it was an interesting idea, and I'm really, really glad it happened because it's one of those things that says, oh yeah, it's pretty simple, but that's exactly how this would turn out. So I had a lot of fun with this episode. I was a lot more invested in it, but again, it's just because of those old faces in new situations that bridge the gap a bit. And I hope that the actual show and what it's doing now is able to rise up to the occasion here, because it really needs to. It really needs to step it up and actually be something interesting and to get a core of its own that is motivated by something that is new, that makes this series stand out on its own. So overall, one thumb up, one thumb middle. And before we head on to a full season review for the new season of The End of the Fucking World, I just want to do a mini review of this other Netflix show that was an adaptation of an indie comic graphic novel, which was called Daybreak. Now, I'm not going to get right on into this because this show was a complete piece of shit, but I'm going to get into it because it was bad in some very unique ways, in just how ununique it was and how unoriginal it was. Now, it's based on this zombie horror survival comic by Brian Ralph, and it's told through the POV of the main character, which is the reader, having to contend with both another survivor and a crazy old survivor that kidnaps both of them. And it's done in a pretty artsy manner, like you're told in real-time panels and all that kind of stuff, and it's pretty interesting. It's a nice light read, and they recently reissued it with like a banner saying now a Netflix original series. And the Netflix original series pretty much just takes the name and the idea of zombies, and I'm putting that in quotes because they're not really zombies in the show, and just tosses everything else out. And I found that kind of funny because at the very least the comic is doing something unique and the show takes pains to not do anything original at all. Pretty funny because the show is told in a fourth wall kind of style, that it's trying to be original and not going to be a regular zombie show. But the thing is that every cliche it wants to subvert, it just takes the second most used cliche. Like, well, we're not going to do this cliche, but we're going to do the cliche right after that, the one that everyone does when they don't want to do the first cliche. Like, you can tell everything that's going to happen because of how they're saying that the first thing is going to happen. Like, okay, if it isn't door number A, then it's going to be door number B, and that's how it always goes. It's not surprising because it doesn't end up actually doing anything like exciting or fresh or original, because they're not actually thinking outside the box. They're thinking inside the box. They're just taking the second most used option. And so Daybreak can be kind of fun at times. Like, it's not a badly made show and has the personality all of its own, but in the terms of plot, in terms of characters, in terms of dynamics, in terms of arcs, everything is just so extremely predictable, and it becomes bland and lifeless and just a slog to get through. And honestly, if you've never seen like a zombie show before, or Kids in the Apocalypse show before, or just a kids show where like there's teens in a dire situation at all, then this would be pretty refreshing to you, because you'll be the first time you see any of these cliches, but all it has is that, and it's trying really hard to say that it doesn't. At the end of it, you're like, oh, so this was all for nothing. This is all in service of trying to, trick the audience into something that they guessed way back in episode 1. And it's pretty ridiculous. It really is. It's not enough to alleviate the fact that the story itself is pretty boring, and it's aggressively, meanderingly boring, and it's desperately trying to prove that it isn't, and that just makes things worse. Overall, one thumb down, one thumb middle. And now we can head on into the full season review of The End of the Fucking World, Season 2. And it's a season that has a completely new continuation that really leaves much of the actual pieces of the graphic novel behind in order to build its own vision of where the characters and story might go. And well, it really went to places that I didn't expect, and I'm really glad it didn't. So spoiler warning ahead, even though I will try to avoid really specific ones where I can. But yeah, this season takes the epilogue of the comic, which I hated, and throws it right in the trash, at least in terms of content, which is a great move, because for as zany and screwy as the first season of the show could be when compared to the small-scale indie feel of the comic, the epilogue of the comic was just too over the line and honestly messy and melodramatic, and it broke the camel's back. in terms of like all of the overly written, overly done, like overcooked, angsty bullshit that the comic was about. The second season of the show takes maybe the tiniest kernels of the epilogue, like the main core idea of how absolutely traumatic and life-shattering the experience of going through all those events would be for a person, and takes a different tact with it. And honestly, a different tact from anything in the first season as well, because it eschews and rebukes the melodramatic, but also turns a stiff, cold shoulder toward the energetic, fun, and wild atmosphere of the first season too. It rejects it. It rejects them both because it's not that kind of story. It's not the story of crazy youthful rebellion that comes with being on the cusp of adulthood. It's actually about adulthood. It's about consequences. It's about what happens next, how people deal with these repercussions, and how they struggle to find their way back after throwing a grenade into their lives at a time when they thought they were invincible. And that was such a perfect core to spin a second season around. It would have been easy to just retread the first season again. In fact, the second season shows us how easy this would have been with a first episode that is almost a macrocosm of everything that made the first season insanely enjoyable, capturing every beat, every high, every low, but with fresh eyes and a new perspective. It kind of feels like we never left, just only hitting unpause. But then the rest of the season just tears that illusion down, and it's magnificent about it. It's taking the previous characters and cast and having them ape or attempt to grasp at familiar sequences and set pieces from season 1, but only succeeding in coming off as cold, uneasy, and pathetically nostalgic. Like they're trying to grasp at something that is no longer real, or was never real, or no longer exists, because it's not something that you can ever actually recapture or drop back into. The leads are just that damaged and changed, and the season takes the time proving that and justifying that to the audience and to themselves. It makes their own journeys of self-realization and our own as an audience of this new tone and atmosphere the same journey. It's immersive and engrossing, all while feeling jarring and quietly somber. In the end, the season feels colder. It feels meditative, and it's a reflection and reaction to season 1, letting the characters come off as more mature and fleshed out. The show gives off this wounded and anxious mood, and it's played to a perfect pitch by pretty much every narrative aspect. The dramatic backbone of the series really shines throughout the season, and that's what really makes it special and gives it a life all of its own, apart from the preconceived notions of what season 1 even was. It makes a case for itself outside of being an unnecessary sequel to a story that was already finished. It's not perfect though. There are moments and scenes that feel too gimmicky and like it's straight out of a sitcom, and the finale feels like it could have hit a lot more harder, more uncertain notes than it ends up doing, because what it ends up doing is that it cements a more rigid sense of closure that is kind of fan servicey, I think, in a way, which feels at odds with the more anxiety-ridden themes of the season. But I can see why they did the latter, at least, because it might not get a third season, and I don't really see why it should, because it kind of caps itself off pretty perfectly here. So it would be better to end on a solid note with the characters rather than leave it too ambiguous and then have people want more in case you don't get more. And there's some wisdom in that. These flaws hardly detract from the final product. It's a show that knew what it wanted to do, what it wanted to be, and the second season that knew how it wanted to expand and build on that. It feels earned, graceful, and full of purpose and thought. The characters and their inner struggles are the main centerpiece here. It's not some wild road trip black comedy like the first season, and that's where you get like the engagement and entertainment. It's the characters' inner lives that are like the focus here, and everything else is sedentary. So you're exploring and delving deeper and deeper into their emotional states and their mental health. That's really the journey we're taking on here. Because in contrast to the first season where they go like miles and miles, in this season they don't get like more than a mile and a half away from where they start, because that's not the purpose here. It's not about a journey in physical terms, about a journey in sort of metaphysical terms. And I thought that was the greatest way you could do a second season and make it different. And that's not something you can really say about a lot of shows. So overall, 2 thumbs up, or number score of 8 out of 10. I had a lot of fun with this. If there's a third season, I would definitely watch that, because where this leaves off, season 2 is a drastically different show than season 1. And season 3, if it ever happens, would have to be a completely different show from this. And if they can find a way to make that work, to make it as justified and as coherent and as earned as this season was, then I'd want to see how they would pull it off, because that's the draw here, as well as the characters and everything they're going through. I want to see more of that if it ever appears. Anyway, that's it for what I watched this week. There are no listener questions this week. And as always, I want to thank everyone out there who's ever sent in a question, comment, or topic to the show. It means so much to me. It's so awesome, and I'm so grateful for that. So thank you so much. It really means a lot. And if anyone out there has their own question, comment, or topic they want to submit to the show, you can always find me on Twitter at THE_SNICKMAN. I'm going to give a shout out to the cover artist for the show at DOTEMCEE. Please check them out. They're amazing and they deserve all the traction they can get. So please give them a follow. I just want to say thank you again for listening. I hope you had a great time. I hope you have a great week and see you again next time.